Hey everybody, I'd like to talk through our handout today, the one about 1 Samuel 1:2 to 2:11, Hannah's story. And you'll notice in this handout that I've clustered up some of the world builders and other elements from the text world theory right at the very beginning. So we're going to look at world builders such as time, location, characters, and objects. We're going to look at function advancers. We're going to look at world shifters, and we're going to note where they appear in the text. I really like to go from the idea of a whole text and kind of work through it rather than going bit by bit to compare texts right at first. Taking a whole text and looking at the interplay between all the features can be really interesting and really enlightening. So if we look at the text in terms of world builders, for example, we'll notice that there's not really a big time frame in there like there is in, for example, in Isaiah, where we know it's the year that King Uzziah died. But we can pick up a little bit on this because of the location, which has the worship taking place in Shiloh. So we have a kind of an early time frame based upon the location. And you'll notice that there are some green highlighted places in here that mention locations. The whole story kind of goes between Shiloh, it goes back to Ramah, and then it goes back to Shiloh again. So there's kind of a travel narrative kind of hidden in here. It's not the main issue that they're traveling back and forth, but it is significant to the plot of the story. Now notice that in verses 1 through 7, there's quite a lot of mention of characters. There's a lot of pink highlighting, a lot of introducing characters and their relationship to one another, and that kind of thing. And the real key thing here is that we learn a little bit about Elkanah in the first verse, and we learn in the second verse that he had 2 wives. Now, this is frowned upon these days, but back in the day, that was fine. And his first wife was named Hannah, and the second one is named Peninnah. However, in a very Hebraic turn of phrase here, we have a kind of chiasm. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Okay, so in that little introductory phrase, just 2 lines here, we understand what the problem of the story is. We have somebody here who has no children. In the ancient Near East, that was a problem. Okay, then we learn that Elkanah himself was a religious man. He would go up every single year to worship at Shiloh. He would run into the priest Eli and his 2 sons, who were priests, called Hophni and Phinehas. And he would do the sacrificing, and then he would give out portions to Peninnah, all her children, all her sons and daughters. And to Hannah, he would give a double portion because he loved her. I really like this particular sentence in the story because it plays on something I think that gets lost a little bit in Old Testament story, and that is that marriage did have this element of love and caring and fondness for one another that is so characteristic of what we hope for a good marriage these days. And he loved her, and he loved her in spite of herself. He loved her in spite of the fact that the Lord had closed her womb and that she had no children. Now, Peninnah used to think this was sort of an interesting thing to do, and she would kind of get after Hannah, and she would provoke her, and she would tease her about the fact that the Lord had closed her womb. And so this made Hannah miserable. Like, wants to go on a trip with somebody who's going to give you a hard time about your perceived failing all the time? And it went on year by year by year. Here, every time she went up to the house of the Lord, Peninnah would provoke her. Okay, but her husband Elkanah said to her, here we have a shift from kind of laying the groundwork to jumping into the action of the story. Elkanah said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? Okay, so Elkanah really cares for Hannah and wishes that she was fulfilled with their relationship. But of course, in this particular setting, there's that desire for the child. So Hannah got up after dinner and went into the presence of the Lord. And here we have enter the character of Eli the priest, who's sitting in the seat beside the doorpost to the temple. And so he observes Hannah going in, and she's very upset, and she's praying to the Lord and weeping, and she makes her vow. Now this is where the conditional comes in, and you can read the text here. If only you would look on the misery of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give your servant a male child, then I will set him before you as a Nazarite until the day of his death. He shall drink neither wine nor intoxicants, and no razor shall touch his head. Okay, so this is a really amazing sort of thing to say. It doesn't sound like how I would feel if I was asking God for a child. I don't think I'd want to turn around and sort of hand them back right that very minute. But she so desires to have a child. And it's almost as if she desires to have a child to honor God, not only just for her own having of the child, but that this child would be an honor to the Lord. Um, and so she prays before the Lord, and Eli looks at her. Now, here's the interesting world shift that we get. Eli thought she was drunk. Okay. Now, this is presented in Peterson as being deliberate misinformation. It's going to shift the story around a little bit because you're going, wait a minute, we know she's not. She knows she's not. But Eli, the priest, thinks she is. And if he thinks she's drunk, we've got a little trouble here. So Eli says to her, how long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Put away your wine. But Hannah speaks for herself. And Hannah's response here is one reason why she's such a full character in the story, why she's pretty much the main character in the story, because she has a lot to say for herself. And so she answers, no, my lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. And so forth. And then Eli behaves himself like a priest at this point. He answers at verse 17, go in peace, the God of Israel grant the petition you have made to him. And this is a blessing that he is able to ask of the Lord because of his position as priest. And it's underlined because it is Eli's wish that God would grant the petition of Hannah. And Hannah doesn't let it drop there. She responds and says, let your servant find favor in your sight. Okay, so we have there the second and third of the conversation sorts of things that are in there. And what you'll notice about the first one, Elkanah and Hannah at 1:8, nobody talked back to Elkanah. When Hannah wept before God at 1:10 and 11, God didn't directly answer her then. When Eli and Hannah talk, however, there's the conversation that goes back and forth. And so it's a little bit more of a normal conversational pattern. Okay, so keep an eye out for the places where we have the little yellow tab. I put yellow tabs where some of these conversations are. Okay, at 22, Hannah didn't go up back again because, oops, I skipped ahead. Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Samuel. Okay, this sounds a little bit like the Old Testament. Behold, so-and-so, so-and-so. Behold, the virgin will conceive and bear a son, and he will be called. You know, it's kind of this almost formulaic saying. She conceived and bore a son, and she named him Samuel, for I have asked him of the Lord. And Elkanah then goes again up to offer to the Lord, but Hannah did not go up. Now, this conversation here at 22 is significant because the conversation starts with Hannah. It starts with the person who has a little bit more of the status in the conversation, and here it's the female character. She says to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and remain there forever. I will offer him as a Nazarite for all time. And we do have a response. Elkanah responds to her, do what seems best and wait until you've weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his word. So he's eager to see the conclusion of God's promise there to come to fulfillment. And so she did. And then we get to verse 24, which is where I wanted you to pay good attention to the things that are outlined in red, because those three things, the 3-year-old bull, the ephah of flour, and the skin of wine, are significant to the story. Not only did she take the child, but she takes along a bull, a big bag of flour, and a skin of wine. So what is the significance of those things when you go before the Lord to worship at Shiloh? And especially at 25, what's the significance of slaughtering the bull and bringing the child to the priest? Okay, those questions will come to next week in our as part of our forum post that we'll be talking about. But be thinking about them and see if you can round up a few possibilities for answers. And then we have a response. This is our 5th verbal interplay here. And it's Hannah speaking to Eli at 1:26 to 28. But again, Eli doesn't talk back. And so that's really interesting. She said, oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who is standing here in your presence praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me the petition that I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as I live, he is given to the Lord. And she left him there for the Lord. Okay, that would be kind of a tough move, I would think, as a mom to leave a little child back when you go turn around and go back home after worshiping and know that this child is now going to be looked after in sort of the boarding school of Eli, so to speak. But it's a huge part of the story of her being able to sort of give him up. And then she prays and says, "My heart exults in the Lord. My strength is exalted in my God. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in my victory." So, and on it goes for another few verses. What I'd like you to do during the rest of this week is to make some observations through the prayer and see what you find in there. Time, location, characters, objects, characters, and what kinds of behavior do the characters exhibit, and particularly what sorts of theological statements are being made in this prayer. Another thing to think about is, does this Hannah, who's praying the prayer, match the Hannah that we've read about so far? Does she sound, and does her voicing sound similar? What's going on here with the difference between the narration and then this prayer at the end? After the prayer, we get to the very last verse here. Elkanah went home to Ramah while the boy remained to minister to the Lord in the presence of the priest. And it doesn't really say where Hannah was. I'm assuming she went with Elkanah, but we might have to go peer in there a little farther and see. For those of you who are into Hebrew at all, I've just gone in there and sort of highlighted a few things so you can kind of look. Otherwise, just ignore that part. It was kind of fun to see what in particular, what verbs of speaking were being used. Because if you have the Amer, Viomer, and he said, that's like what we would say. And he said to me, and I said to him, and it's really normal reporting kinds of stuff. But if you have other stuff like he hollered at her, or he shouted and she cried, and those are very vivid kinds of verbs of speaking, and they're a little less common. And so they can help to give color to the story. Okay, so that's what I was looking for in there. I was looking for, are these typical verbs of speaking, so they go under the radar. But when you get the more excitable ones or the more vivid ones, they are sometimes the highlight of the story. Okay, so I'm going to sign off here. I will talk to you soon, and we'll do some more next time. Bye now.